Hello and welcome back to a rather cold workshop. In the last video we dealt with pure evil in the form of Stalin. We dealt with mass murder on an absolutely colossal scale and some very, very upsetting European history. This video we're back to numbers again, but they're important numbers and they're to do with the misuse of numbers. We're going to start with misinformation, and that's typified by this graphic here. This turned up on LinkedIn about a week or so ago, and it was somebody trying to show that there wasn't any real change in death figures in Britain in 2020. Now, we know from previous videos that's not right. There has been quite a considerable increase in deaths in 2020. And we'll explain why that is later. You can see that I've marked it as being wrong because I don't want this graphic to get out again and be used elsewhere misleadingly, because it is misleading, and the reason why it's misleading is the number in the bottom line, which is 561,000. We know from previous videos that that is actually 604,000, so it's about 8% out. So when you put the real figure in, the argument that was being made that 2020 had the lowest deaths for many years is not actually true. There is also a higher figure for 2020, which in fact is also correct depending on how the year 2020 is defined. 2020 is unusual in having had 53 weeks in the calendar year for statistical purposes. This is not a trick by any evil statisticians. This just sometimes happens. It depends on the day of the week that starts the year, and you can look up ISO week numbers and you can see how it's calculated. 2020 just happens to be a 53 week year. For the remainder of this video, we're only looking at the first 52 weeks. And at the first 52 weeks of every year, just to try and keep things even. This next graphic shows an article from the BBC website from about a week ago. And it's quite a horrifying headline. The headline itself is right as far as it goes, but in fact it doesn't show the full picture, and it doesn't actually convey the story that's written down in the article that goes below it. So I don't know whether it was a sub-editor or not who wrote that, but it's not right. And the next graph, which is also from the same article, shows a quite horrifying view of the death figures in 2020. We're going to look at these figures in a bit more detail just in a moment, but these two particular graphics together are examples of disinformation. This is information which is presented deliberately in such a way as to be misleading, and you'll see by the end of this video why that can be done and how easily that can be done by people who are determined to show the wrong picture of a situation. So here's the real data. This first chart shows totals for deaths in England and Wales, all ages, all causes for the years 2000 to 2020. And you can see it shows what looks to be quite a large increase in 2020. This is partly due to the presentation of the data. If you look at the y-axis on the left hand side, you'll see it goes between 450,000 and 610,000. If we expand that, so we go from 0 up to 700,000, it looks an awful lot less scary. And you can see that it's pretty much a flat line, with a slight increase from about 2014 onwards, and then a sharp increase between 2019 and 2020. If we expand the years out a bit on the x-axis, going from 1980 to 2020, you'll see that that straight line that we saw is actually an inflection point, and it's from a downward slope, turned around about 1980 and became a slight upward slope in the past 10 years. And if we go back to the beginning of all of the records that we have in 1838, you'll see that it goes up and down and up and down and finally up again. It's been going up and down for a very long time. And this last chart is interesting because it shows us that in terms of total deaths in England and Wales, the total in 2020 was pretty much matched in 1989, 1982, 1972, 1963, 1940, 1918 and 1900. So although it's a big figure by current standards, it's by no means unprecedented. Of course, raw death figures are not the whole story. You'll know that over this period the population of the country has been growing fairly steadily. And if we look at this chart here, you can see it is actually pretty much a constant gradient since 1838, with two very noticeable blips at the periods of the Second World War. This translates through into rates, percentages of death. This chart shows the death rate in percentages. That is the percent chance that any one person will die in that particular year, from the years 1838 up to 2020. You can see right at the start of the record there's between a 2 and a 2.5% chance of any person dying in any year, and by modern day standards that's very high, because you can see that it decreased, the rate decreased very quickly down to the 1920s where it stabilised, until the late 60s when it started to take a turn down again, and it kept on slowly curving down until the middle of the 2000s, at which point it started to go up again. This chart shows a bit more detail of the last 40 years, and you can see a steady decline from 1980 down to about 2010, where it's plateaued and in fact started to go up slightly, and then gone up quite a bit last year. And in more detail again, you can see the plateau and the slight increase, and then the sharp increase in 2020. And the effect of this improving life expectancy can be seen in this chart, where we see between 1971 and 2016 the proportion of people in the population who are over 85 doubled in that period. So it's no great surprise that we now have an awful lot more old people, the people who are particularly susceptible to respiratory illness, than we ever had before. So there you are. Misinformation, disinformation, and the same data presented in many different ways, and only one way, given all of the context, gives you all of the information. So you really do have to know exactly what it is you're looking at and exactly how it's been presented before you can make any sense of it. For that reason, you have to pick the people you get your information from very carefully and trust how they present it to you, and make sure that there's no ulterior motive behind their presentations. So let's go back to BBC again, and this graphic here came from the BBC website yesterday. Again, it's a headline. Again, it's actually right. But we know from what we've been discussing that once you put this into context, that headline is wrong. Although the numbers are high, the rate is actually comparatively low. And this last graphic that we've got here again is from LinkedIn. And this is from somebody who again was trying to demonstrate that the number of deaths in Scotland was low, and got it wrong in several different ways. Although I'm sure the effort was quite sincere. The headline that they've used is no excess deaths in Scotland, but what they've shown from a Freedom of Information request, which must make it really good and really high quality data, of course. What they've shown is a record of deaths in hospitals in Scotland for several years, culminating in 2020. The 2020 figures are not correct, they're not complete, because they don't show anything for November or December 2020, so it's only the first 10 months of the year. So what we're looking at is a figure for one particular location for deaths for 10 out of 12 months of the year. And we know that during 2020 the Help Protect the NHS campaign was rather too successful. People stayed away from hospitals, and the number of deaths at home has increased considerably. So it would not be possible to make this comparison for 2020 with any previous year, because of the deliberate efforts by the government to keep people out of hospitals. This last graphic is another example of misinformation. The one BBC one before it is disinformation. The BBC are deliberately trying to mislead. The last one is accidentally misleading, not deliberately so. So again, you have to choose your sources, and you have to understand the context in which they're being presented. Right, that's another video just with figures passed. I hope you found it educational, if not enjoyable. The next video, we're dealing purely with people and how people feel. See you then.